So it turns out the bird, Nadu, just banned in Modern. It turns out that the issue around it wasn't that it was designed to break Modern. It wasn't pushed to the upper levels of what we expect from a Modern card. It was in fact designed for Commander. It's kind of like saying the quiet part out loud in some ways, but Michael Majors spoke about on the banning of Nadu Winged Wisdom in Modern that the reason that it became the nightmare that it was that its original design was considered to be unfun for Commander. So when they nerfed it, it became unusable, and thus it got changed swiftly and dramatically towards the end of development and didn't get tested. The pressures from Commander leaked into a Modern set, or a set designed for Modern, and thus broke a card so badly that it needed banning out of Modern. There is a lot to unpack here. All that and more in today's video. But before we jump into that, big shout out to today's sponsor Elgato, who helped me with lights and with stands, with interfaces for my face cam and my overhead 4K camera. Every time you see me streaming on Whatnot or on a show like EDH Hijinks, you can actually tell what my messy Abdul Adrian enabled board is. That's because of the 4K Facecam Pro, baby. Or perhaps you checked out my first proper painting video. This was done using the lights from Elgato and the overhead 4K camera Facecam Pro. So whether you're making content or you're just looking for a new setup for lights and cameras for spell, table, webcam, Commander, Elgato have you sorted with the best gear in the industry. I swore by them before they sponsored me and I swear by them now. Use the link in the description below to help support the channel and pick up your Elgato gear, and cheers for Elgato for sponsoring this video. There was much discussion with Nadu around how it was simply so broken. Was it designed to be too good in Modern? Was it a mistake with the way it was worded? Was it meant to truly be only 2 times a turn across your entire board, not per creature? All of this and more was covered by Michael Majors in the On Banning Nadu article. He explains that originally Nadu Winged Wisdom was going to be a 1 green blue legendary 3/4 bird wizard with flying. You may cast permanent spells as if they had flash, and whenever a permanent you control becomes a target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, reveal the top card of your library if it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield, otherwise put it into your hand. So originally it was a 3-mana legendary creature that gave flash to all your permanents, which isn't unusual as a mechanic. There are several that do this across Magic's lifetime, Vidalcan Ori being the most famous probably, but there are other creatures that do it that can exist in the command zone. But 3-mana 3/4 flyer that does it would have been pretty pushed. That was clearly a Modern Horizons design because it was better than most things. It was best in class. But on top of that, the original mechanic was whenever an opponent targeted it, you would get to draw a card or put a land up on your deck. It was like Leovold. It was a pseudo version of this, but with some land ramping in as well to make it unique by comparison. He talks about how during the development of a set, which he was the lead for on Modern Horizons, there are multiple different parties and teams that will have input into the set. He says that after various levels of feedback, in one of these meetings, there was a great deal of concern raised by Nadu's flash granting ability for Commander play. After removing the ability, it wasn't clear that the card would have an audience or a home, something that is important for every card we make. Ultimately, my intention was to create a build around aimed at Commander play, which resulted in the final text. I think the problem would have been that it was a Commander that allowed this flash gameplay at a very low cost, with extra upside as well. But ultimately, I don't see how that card would have been that broken. It's reminiscent of Prophet of Kruphix, a card that did give your stuff flash, but it also untapped your lands like a Seedborn Muse, which is arguably the better part of the card. That's why this is banned. The flash is good, the untapping is better. The combination of both makes it broken. But the weird thing here is that any sort of input from a Commander thing changed a card that, in theory, should have been designed for Modern. Modern Horizons is a set that goes directly into Modern and is designed to invigorate archetypes and create new archetypes within that competitive format. The reality of it is that it does a lot more than that. It doesn't invigorate, it bulldozes the current climate and creates an entire new format. It rotates Modern and turns into a block constructed style format. I was quite negative about Modern Horizons in the past, and Modern Horizons 3 is, whilst exciting and splashy at first, has all but secured the idea that Horizons heads are bad news for Magic across all the formats. But why would you make this a consideration, a Commander consideration, when designing for Modern? And on top of that, why would you even make this consideration for a format that has a separate ban list and a self-policing mentality? I'm going to answer both those questions, but I just want to highlight the irony of trying to stop Nadu from being an absolute fucking bastard of a Commander card and end up being an absolute fucking bastard of a Commander card. Nadu is busted as shit in Commander 2. This is one of the higher tier Commander decks now. It's super high powered and it's CEDH playable. It is a combo engine in the command zone that gives you card advantage too. But ultimately the question comes down to, should they be designing for Commander in non-Commander sets? Hell, should they be designing for Commander generally? This all came out yesterday, and I've got a video coming out tomorrow from this video that is about the top 6 design mistakes of all time, including Hogak in there. Spoiler for one of them right there. I think the video is very good, very funny, really well edited by my editor, No More Rugrats, and it was well written in my opinion too. It's probably the best video I'm going to put out for a couple of weeks. And I don't want to go back and chop it up and change it to add Nadu into the conversation. It's just very, very time relative, but people are going to notice the omission of Nadu now that this is a hot topic on Reddit and Twitter and YouTube. But one of the questions that I come to and talk about in that video, and I'm going to talk about more in depth here, is this idea of like, should they even be designing for Commander? Is this not a perversion of what Commander really is? Originally, Commander was meant to be the space that you just play with the stuff that isn't playable elsewhere, and some of the other stuff that is playable elsewhere. The idea was that you could play with your 5, 6, 7, and 8 mana stupid dumb cards and play stupid dumb strategies that weren't playable elsewhere. And the format took off like wildfire, a perfect storm, lightning in a bottle, although arguably they've managed to replicate that, so maybe lightning in a bottle is not the correct term. But either way, it resonated with the audience because it was magic, but with the stakes turned down to 0 and the social element turned up to 100. And thus, when you get that, you get a perfect area for everyone from casual to competitive to hang out and fuck about. But in turn, the success of it as a popular, community-created, non-Wizards of the Coast thing was that they picked it up, they adopted it, they introduced precons, and they began to consider it as part of the buffet, as Mark Rosewater calls it, of options and things available to Magic players via the Magic the Gathering game, provided by WotC, the product that's given to us. And thus, they designed for it, and they see us as an audience that they need to cater for. I would argue, and this is not a hot take, this is the most basic milquetoast take, but I completely agree with it, that Commander was better before, when it wasn't heavily designed towards. It was where you get to play with all your toys that don't fit somewhere else. It was where you got to innovate and muck about with things that weren't designed to interact with one another. Nowadays, when you make a Commander deck, if you want to play, you know, not competitively, but if you want to keep up with the ongoing trends of people buying the most ludicrous cards that exist, Smothering Tides and Dockside Extortionists and Trouble in Pairs and your latest commanders, then you kind of have to pick a lot of cards from a select list of stuff that's very fucking good. Gone are the days of synergistic piles of weird oddities. And I say gone, that's the interesting point, right? Because Commander isn't competitive unless you're playing CDH, unless you're playing at the upper echelons of the power levels at tournaments, or with the intention that everyone at the table wants to win no matter what. So the argument is that those days aren't gone if we all self-regulate and moderate ourselves. If we don't play decks that are, 10 out of 10 power levels, we actually try and play in that sweet spot of a 7. But the truth be told, people don't really do that as much as we like to pretend they do during the online discourse around Commander. When you go to a game night at your local store, you will often meet several players who have no idea about these discourses and conversations, and their decks are fucked, and they're trying to be little fucked bastards. There was a player at my local store who actually does engage with video content. They found out who I was, and well, I would excited that I knew who the professor was, a few weeks into me going to the store. But they're the one who's got a CDH deck that they're trying to use to pub stomp other people. That's an individual player problem, but it is a thing that is like emblematic of some of the play experience you're going to get trying to play Commander in public spaces. So we aren't going to self-regulate, and we aren't going to pull back as a collective from the best stuff, especially if everyone else is trying to play the best stuff. It's very hard not to play Dockside when every other fucker in the room is playing Dockside. So really, this whole question around should they design for Commander is an interesting one, because it is systemic. It's very core. The problem is what Wizards are doing, not necessarily what the player base is doing. You can't print this stuff and expect us to feign away from it. There's this point that keeps being said online that Commander players didn't ask for this, or we didn't ask for this.
I never asked for this.
I've seen so many people parrot this, it feels like a party line at this point. And the truth be told, yes, the vocal majority of content creators and those that engage with the content creators on platforms like Twitter or Reddit didn't ask for this. But the majority of people who don't know who Josh Lee Kwai are, they did ask for it. Not vocally, not with their words, but with their spending habits. They gave signals to Wizards that buying $100 precons with Chase staples in them, or like hoovering up packs that have Commander rares printed into that you know, for sets that are meant to be anything that aren't Commander. All that stuff is getting opened and gobbled up en masse, which gives them signals that people do in fact want this, even if we say, I never asked for this. So the unfortunate reality is, whilst I would like it to be that we just like figure out the puzzle that is Commander like we did back in 2011 or 2012, that genie is out of the bottle. The money is being made, and Wizards of the Coast are going to try and make that money by pumping random powered up shit out into sets that's aimed at Commander. Nadu being an example. Should they? No. Will they stop? Fuck no. I'm hoping that Nadu, as an example of this, is a place where they can clearly see internally that what they are doing with the fingers in the pies of being pushed to make Commander rares in a modern legal power crept set like Horizons, that is evidently toxic and damaging to the overall health of the game beyond that which is just Commander. I guess the problem is that if Commander is the true cash cow, if Commander is the teat upon which they milk the golden goose, then I guess they won't give a shit, because Modern and Legacy and all that sort of stuff is just a small part of the pie, and the rest of it is Commander flavored. The reality is the design sensibilities of most sets shouldn't be informed by Commander, and that Commander design aspect should be only in precons. But we know that won't be the case, because if they put it only to precons, they aren't utilizing the Commander audience as a potential customer to purchase every product. And that's the whole point. They want every product to appeal to the largest customer base, which is the Commander player. If you're really looking for somewhere to point the finger of blame, it's not Commander, it's capitalism, to use a turn of phrase that I think feels so kind of obvious and dumb, but it's the spending habits of the audience combined with what will make Wizards the most money that leads to these outcomes that aren't good for the long-term health of the game and its overall collection of formats. In many ways, the admission of guilt or that they were wrong done by Michael Majors with the article, which I'll link in the description, is great. It's good to see transparency and clearly holding up hands and being like, look, I made a mistake. And he even goes on to talk about how like he's going to improve on it in future, talking about the idea of actually being more risk adverse as a measure to avoid this in future. It's good. I really like the article, and I really like the approach from Wizards there. The interesting thing is that it's either consciously or subconsciously a bit of a call for help. It's a bit of like a help, I'm trapped behind bars. The bars being the demands of a corporation or company that wants to appeal to the largest audience available, that audience being Commander. In many ways, it's funny to see designers who are probably very good at what they do get tripped up by the need to design for multiple things at once. Some of those things being things that don't need to be considered in this circumstance, the Commander design space for Modern Horizons 3. Because beyond all of this, there's this other point of that Commander has its own ban list. So that card was a problem for Commander, it could get banned in Commander. There is a little bit of tension there when the approach to Commander is that people should self-moderate, which I've already said doesn't really happen. I don't know what the solution is here. I'm more observing a problem without a solution. I completely understand that. The ban list for Commander is kind of nonsense, right? But I also don't think making it 100 cards long is the solution either. However, we've got this thing of like vibes and self-moderation that also doesn't work either, which means that we're starting to like buckle a little bit and bloat in a way that is not great for everyone involved. I guess the point is that when there is a separate ban list and when the format you're trying not to upset already has this self-moderation idea, then perhaps you shouldn't be peeling back in ways that are untested. And I think Wizards and Michael come to that conclusion in the article anyway, that going to anything untested is bad. In some ways, it's like, let it go out there and let Commander deal with it. Let the rules committee, let the community deal with that thing, because that's far less important than fucking up like the competitive integrity of the game, in my opinion. And on that note, the idea that this was untested, that no playtesting was available because it was done so late in development, there's two issues here. One is changing things late in development is an ongoing problem. We've seen Jace the Mind Sculptor, Skull Clan, Battleskull, and other cards just break when they change things very late in their development cycle, so that's something they should avoid, and they've learned from it in the past, but sometimes I guess you fall back into bad habits. But the other element that it just can't be playtested because it's too late in development, or they don't have the resources, that's another indication that the large amount of product being put out by Wizards of the Coast is too large and too much of a cumbersome thing to manage by smaller development teams. I've said this in the past, I don't think the output of the company has scaled alongside the amount of staff they use, and thus the stress on the average developer or back-end producer of our favourite card game is higher than it's ever been. And that's because Wizards of the Coast don't want to spend the money on the resources. You can see this company-wide, and you see it with Arena especially, where manpower is the solution to a lot of things, but Wizards of the Coast just won't invest in that. And then people toe the corporate line and say it's not that simple, when it really is. In the video tomorrow that I put out, I talk about things like the initiative and other similarly designed for Commander stuff that I think is actually really, really good. I think the net positive to the game, to Commander and similar, is high. I don't get upset about the fact that it did things to Legacy or Vintage or Canadian Highlander or similar. In many ways, I think the design mistakes like that help to make those formats more interesting and exciting in the long run. Part of that discussion is that I think they need to be quick acting when they do trip up and fuck up under the format via something like this. Part of the exaggerating issue here is not that Nadu blew up onto the scene, they realized it was a mistake late after the fact, which they didn't test it enough, and then they banned it. Instead, they waited a month, or no, 2 months, wasn't it? For like no reason other than an arbitrary date had been set and they didn't want to upset people who had already bought the card, but then you just know the ban is coming so people can get upset anyway. It's a messy, messy way to deal with it. In many ways, if you're going to push the envelope with either power creep nonsense like Modern Horizons, or pushing it just to make Commander staples that end up not considering the balance of 1v1 when they're designed for the balance of 1v3 others, then perhaps you need to be a bit more finger on the pulse about how much damage that's doing to other formats and the game in general, and then be more over the top with your bans in a way. Be more on, over the top's not the right word, be just more on it about banning. I hate the idea of regularly banning things out from people because it is a monetary cost to people that buy into the stuff, and it helps to, I say it helps, it exaggerates an issue of damaging the confidence people have in the game, full stop. But that whole issue is so far back in terms of how we fix that. How we fix that is not doing Power Creep Modern Horizon stuff, not designing for Commander. But these are things that I just don't think Wizards of the Coast are going to listen to. Those things aren't going to stop because they are the things that turn the faucet and the money pours out. So we're right down the other end of things, where the alternative is trying to fix it while you gobble up all the money. Just swimming through the money to try and turn off the tap. I'm trying to follow this analogy to the logical conclusion. To turn off the tap when it's drowning the baby. The baby in this context is Modern and the RCQ season. That's a fucked up analogy. You're not going to cut this at the root because the root cause makes a load of fucking money. So you got to do it elsewhere. Having more regular bans is probably part of that. Are Commander players to blame? That's another question this video asks. And no, I don't think so. I do think like we don't ask for this as everyone clambers to buy the precons and the powerful shit. It is nonsense. People do ask for this through their buying habits, but are they to blame when they're given the thing by the company? No. And I don't really buy this idea that everyone's blaming Commander players right now. I'm pretty sure people are blaming Wizards of the Coast for this. Designing for Magic is incredibly fucking hard because there's so many moving parts and so many formats to consider. It makes sense that the format that they consider the most would be the largest one in terms of player base and the largest one in terms of monetary income. It's not the reality that I want to live in, but it's the reality we have to live in if we're realistic about it. I do think that asking people to design Magic the Gathering cards that fit into Legacy, Modern and Commander all at the same time is a task that is bordering on the impossible. Nadu is an example of that when they fail, when the impossibility catches up with them. I think some of the other issues beyond the banning is the costs issue too. Not only in buying the cards and having them banned away, as many players are moaning about now with grief because they thought it was safe, but it's also that the cards that they're going to have to regularly ban to fix formats and stop them being a massive pile of fuck are also in premium price products. And that sucks, right? You ask us to pay more money for a higher chance of our cards getting banned out. The end result of having cards banned because they're too good in one format because they're designed for another is not the worst thing in the world. I just think all the building blocks that push that problem up higher are things like price, the lack of a regular ban schedule, needing to push the designs for formats that aren't meant to be the main focus of the set. There's so many other small building blocks that make it worse. And I think if they start to address some of these, it'll be good. But I don't think they will. We're going to have a torrent of content, we'll have a torrent of content aimed at Commander, and the price is not going down. We are, unfortunately, in a bloated period of Magic. I still love Magic, by the way. I fucking, Standard right now rules. And I'm quite looking forward to playing Modern now that Grief and Nadu are gone. But we unfortunately got to come to terms with the fact that we live in a bit of a fucked up environment thanks to the things that have ended up making Wizards money. And that's kind of sad, if I'm honest. It leaves me with a really bitter taste in my mouth going out of this. Like, I can weather it and I can put up with it, but it does bug me that all the solution points are things that they just will never consider, because those things are antithetical to making shit tons of fucking money. I'm sorry if this video was a downer. It was never meant to be. I went a bit off script about halfway through, and I've ended up basically kind of pouring my heart out about the sad state of Magic in many ways. I say sad state, it's still an incredibly enjoyable game. I guess when it's such a good game, when it's one of the greatest games, if not the greatest game ever made, you really have to screw the pooch and burn the field to really fuck it up. And I think Wizards struggle to do that even. But yeah, there's a lot of pressures on contemporary Magic design, and all of those pressures lead to the game being in a worse state than it could be. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. If you're looking to pick up some Elgato gear, use the link in the description below. I'll see you in the next one. Ta-ta for now.